DangerDolan. It's been almost 20 years since Warcraft Orcs and Humans was released. Back then, it was a simple RTS in the vein of Dune 2, not bringing much new to the table except single-player mission variety and randomly generated maps called scenarios. The human and orc races were identical in everything but name, the plot improvised on the fly by Bill Roper, who voiced the mission briefings without a script. Then 1 year later, Warcraft 2 Tides of Darkness comes out, perfecting and advancing every element in Orcs and Humans, including a fog of war, a map editor, and battle.net, which should be featured in almost every Blizzard game thereafter. Its expansion set Beyond the Dark Portal continued the story in Draenor, and both games were bundled into the PlayStation port, The Dark Saga, which is how I was introduced to the series. StarCraft, released in 1998, took over the RTS developers' time until 2002, when we finally saw Warcraft 3 Reign of Chaos. Like StarCraft, Reign of Chaos utilized a character-driven story to advance the single-player campaign, but this time with in-game, real-time cinematics to flesh out the relationship between character, environment, and action, and only using pre-rendered cinematics to convey key plot points, like Arthas returning to Lordaeron to murder his father. You had hero units that could level up, equip gear, and use items, 3D terrain, cutscenes, top quality voice acting, campaigns for 4 different races. StarCraft and Brood War may have been the go-to competitive RTS, but Warcraft 3 was like the perfect story-driven RTS, and one I sunk a good deal of my childhood into. Then World of Warcraft was released and everything changed. The story went in 1,000 new directions, immersion became the game's focus, RPG replaced RTS. The programming team which worked on Warcraft 3 turned to StarCraft 2 and its expansions Heart of the Swarm and Legacy of the Void. The lead designer for Warcraft 3 Reign of Chaos, The Frozen Throne, Vanilla WoW, and Burning Crusade, Rob Pardo, he moved to Project Titan along with the rest of the creative force behind Warcraft 2, the original StarCraft, and Warcraft 3. This Project Titan is still being worked on to this day. For more information, refer to the linked video in the description box below. So with the company's biggest hitters focused on Titan and the RTS programming team busy churning out the final StarCraft 2 expansion, are we finally going to hear the announcement for the long overdue Warcraft 4? Well, according to Frank Pierce, the team leader for most of Blizzard's projects, if the team is passionate about a new sequel, then it will likely happen, but only after the StarCraft 2, Diablo 3 and WoW expansions have eased off will we discuss what to tackle next. Even all the way back in 2009, just before StarCraft 2 was released, J. Allen Brack stated outright that until all the expansions for StarCraft 2 were finished, they would not be working on a Warcraft sequel, but that the team was really enthusiastic about the possibility to work on it. So is Warcraft 4 in development? Well, I personally think there's a very high chance of it. At the very least, the Warcraft 4 concept and storyboard have been in progress since the completion of Wings of Liberty. Generally with Blizzard games, they start off with concept art to get a feel for a certain game, with a 2D design layout and projected game development timeline on the side. Pre-rendered cinematics are planned now and worked on for years, while the rest of the story is fleshed out right up until the 3D models are created to test an environment and gameplay style. Once all this is done, the game is given full artwork, detailed models, textures, gameplay balance, and last-minute design alterations, with bug testing in a Friends and Family alpha, and open beta taking place in something resembling a crude rendition of the final product. Until Legacy of the Void is released with StarCraft 2, the best you'll get is a rough story, development outline, 2D design layout, and concept art, but it means once the team is free, they'll be able to jump straight into the programming side with a plan, ready, and waiting. But how would Warcraft 4 affect WoW? Since the game is such a progressive and persistent world, would it make sense to release a Warcraft 4 RTS in the midst of WoW's lifespan? Well, it all comes down to story, doesn't it? At the moment, WoW is blazing through villains and story arcs with each new expansion, so much to the point that all we have left are 2 expansion sets before the narrative well becomes dry. Pandaria proved Blizzard can pull an expansion out of their ass, but for how much longer? This is where Warcraft 4 comes in. If you can time Warcraft 4's release to coincide with the final Legion expansion, it can create a completely new batch of storylines like Warcraft 3 did for Warcraft 2 in a fully immersive, cinematic, single-player campaign. You want a new Illidan, Arthas, or Thrall? Well, that would be the time to do it. Do what Brood War did for their human campaign with the United Earth Directorate. Set it in the same universe, but focus on new and interesting characters. You can tell stories in WoW, but you never achieve the same intimacy with the player that you see through an RTS campaign. I don't want to see Thrall's antics from afar. I want to control him, mold him, watch him level up and grow as a character. I feel it's a given that we'd need a WoW 2 following Warcraft 4, but I'll save that topic for another discussion. As for inclusions I'd like to see in this theoretical RTS, perhaps a time jump in the vein of Knights of the Old Republic, 1,000 years after some major catastrophe, just so we avoid running into story consistency issues. Have one of the only surviving races be Naga, because we've gone the whole of WoW without playable Naga, and they teased us in Warcraft 3 with playable Naga race, and please God, just let us play as Naga. Make it 4 or even 5 playable races, but no more than that. Campaigns like Warcraft 3, not race expansions like StarCraft 2. Basically just make a Warcraft 3, but bigger. That's all I want. Now the reason StarCraft 2 is so successful and lives on to this day is purely because of the competitive scene. Warcraft 3 had this to an extent, but when you have imbalanced units like Mountain Giants, useless when compared to Druids of the Claw, or heroes like the Death Knight and Blade Master, far superior ability-wise to ones like the Paladin, then it doesn't really count as an esport. Likewise, you can mass an army of footmen and rush a base with almost no penalty. Some races like the Undead can't base expand without leaving their new gold mine entirely vulnerable. If Warcraft 4 can blend StarCraft's competitive scene with evolutionary inclusions of Warcraft 3 like hero classes and 4 unique races, then you'll have a game with profitable longevity. Otherwise, unless WoW subscriber numbers can help push the sale figures, it may not be as lucrative to create this game than to just release a new WoW expansion. Of course, if they don't create Warcraft 4, I will personally lead an army to Blizzard headquarters to calmly discuss the matter with a team of developers, where I hope we will be served tea and crumpets, possibly some scones with cream, because that would make the day perfect. If they still refuse to build Warcraft 4, we will of course massacre the team, but only after laying down some newspaper so we don't get blood or brain residue on the carpet. And now we turn to some viewer comments, starting with Link-oo. Blizzard should make a Warcraft storyline away from the current rabble of Azeroth. Make a whole new story in another world or splinter faction of orcs and Draenei battling against the Burning Legion. Since this different section of the universe is not influenced by Azeroth, it can be unpredictable and could end however the writer wants. The idea of different sections of the universe resisting the Burning Legion is awesome, and they could later be gathered to fight Sargeras. A lot of WoW novels have this same mindset, focused on a new area of the story, but keep it grounded with characters and locations present in the game, kind of like Broxagar the Orc that travelled back in time for the War of the Ancients. This is why spin-offs were considered more viable as TV pilots than some random idea with no context, because people are already familiar with it. But if we stick to the source material too closely, like if the Warcraft 4 RTS replayed all the events of Cataclysm and Pandaria in an RTS format, then it's considered a crappy rehash. I agree with Link that choosing another plot thread to explore would be for the best. It doesn't have to be set 1,000 years in the future. You could explore a pre-Warcraft 1 world, because it worked for Metal Gear Solid, then it'll work for Warcraft. The latest ebook series by Richard Knack takes it further by telling the story of the dragon aspects when there were still proto-drakes. You can set it on different worlds like Link said, or on the dark side of Azeroth, providing they don't use that area for another WoW expansion. But what you need to do is identify the heart of Warcraft. Why was the Warcraft 3 story so compelling? What was it about Illidan, Arthas and Thrall that made them such great characters? Once you can do that, once you have the blueprints to your castle, then you can build it with sand or bricks or grilled cheese. It won't matter because it'll turn out great. If Warcraft 3 can make me feel sympathetic for a race of undead, decomposing skeletons who want to kill everybody, then I think it's safe to say no matter what direction the plot goes, we'll still have a worthy successor to the story of WoW. Now next comment from Whitehorse Productions. I don't think a Warcraft 4 RTS is viable at this current juncture. Even though Blizzard has $1 bajillion and could afford to staff a team to develop it, I think it's a bit of an overextension. Blizzard still has at least one more D3 expansion to crank out, not to mention Pineapple Heads of Protoss for StarCraft 2, whatever they decide to call it, Titan, and the list goes on. I also think that denying WoW players resolution via WoW itself would be a boner kill. Veterans deserve resolution. Now, a few people have commented and claimed that StarCraft 2 would act as a competitor to Warcraft 4. Now, I want to clear up this issue. Did StarCraft ever compete with Warcraft 2? Did StarCraft 2 compete with Warcraft 3? No, because they're totally different games. Same genre, but different aesthetically. If these games had a subscription model, then yes, I'd agree that they might interfere with each other, but they're not. The stories are different. The units, the art style, the gameplay, the campaign structure, and competitive angle are all unique to each game's franchise. The better question to ask is, if the industry is void of RTS titles, would a new title's profit surpass its own development cost? The truth is, the genre doesn't produce enough sales, at least when compared to the income generated from a WoW expansion. It's due in small part to the incompatibility to home consoles, as well as the high learning curve when compared to something like an FPS or platformer. If you're a business looking to balance profit with projects you have the motivation to create, it's important to choose the one that has the lowest production time and maximum gain. What genre is trending at the moment? How big is the audience for my game? Is there a lot of competition in the field, and would we recoup our losses from advertising and so forth? I'm not saying Blizzard have some of these problems, but when the industry doesn't take notice of the RTS genre, you can bet the gaming community will mirror those feelings. As strange as it is, MOBA is the RTS for people who don't want an overly convoluted toolset. You can take one glance at a MOBA, know what's going on, and jump right in the action. But an RTS is complex right from the get-go. Will they make more money from Blizzard All-Stars or Warcraft 4? That is the real question. As for WoW story resolution in Warcraft 4, I agree with Whitehorse Productions to a certain extent. The current war needs resolution, just like Warcraft 3 had with the Battle for Mount Hyjal, just like Warcraft 2 had with the closing of the Dark Portal, just like Warcraft 1 had with the fall of Stormwind. The true end to WoW will come, and it will spark the events of Warcraft 4 in a huge way. Whether that'll involve the Legion or a second Cataclysm remains to be seen. Now, our final comment from Daniel Malone. I don't know if Blizzard has any plans on cutting WoW in the future, but they won't release a Warcraft 4 RTS until then. We still have at least another 3 years on WoW as it is, 1 year MOP, 2 years TDB, and frankly I don't know how they would end WoW. When WoW ends it will have to die, I believe. Not to mention the 50 different campaigns players will expect in Warcraft 4, at least one per race, and whatever new and original features Blizzard has to add to make it a Blizzard game. Well, when you think about it, Warcraft 3 showcased a bunch of races, but they were joined together like orcs and trolls and taurens, and then you got humans and elves and dwarves. All you have to do is make 2 Horde and Alliance races, then add in new factions like Demonic or Neutral or Naga. In fact, if you think about how far WoW has come, how do you integrate those fully fleshed out 3D environments in a low texture eagle view setting? The maps in Warcraft 3 weren't bound by any pre-developed massively multiplayer online worlds at the time, so when you look at something like Orgrimmar or the Barons in the Frozen Throne Rexar campaign, they barely resemble their current WoW depiction. Do they take art from WoW and paste it into Warcraft 4? Would you roll with that? Because I'd feel a bit cheapened. RTS maps need a very specific build type to accommodate missions, like that Kodo escort quest in the Thrall campaign, snaking from one pool of water to the next in the Barrens. If you use Azeroth as it is, half the campaign won't work properly. Back in the vanilla WoW alpha build, Northshire was meant to be an entire town with multiple houses, a city square, and NPCs constantly walking to and fro. But Blizzard decided it was cluttering the world too much, so they downsized the world's scale, which is why zones can vary environments over a few meters, whereas in real life you need to travel miles to go from something like a desert to a forest. Would Warcraft 4 abide by this downsized scale, or would it reimagine everything in full size? I say just disregard Azeroth as it is and start over. The issues run too deep in the very concept. One last point which Daniel brings up, do they need to add new content? As far as I'm concerned, do a StarCraft 2, update all the graphics, give us a brand new story, and overhaul the online custom game system. There's no need to reinvent the wheel if it works and nobody is sick of it yet. Just implement the improvements other RTSs have introduced since Warcraft 3 and call it a day. That's it for this discussion. As for next week's topic, what are your top 5 WoW dungeons? Only the dungeons, not raids, and they can be from any expansion you want. BC, Vanilla, Wrath. If you like an old dungeon before it was revamped, make sure you write like old school Deadmines or old school Shadowfang Keep. So I'm going to tally up the votes from the comments. But if you want your comment featured, then pick your number 1 dungeon and tell me why it's your favorite. If you want a comprehensive list of all the dungeons so you know which one if you can't remember it, then visit the WoW Wiki page in the description box below this video. Yes, I know Wowpedia is better than WoW Wiki, but the WoW Wiki page is better than the Wowpedia page, so deal with it. That's it. Have a good one.